Hey everybody, my name is Daniel Marino and this is Karate Thoughts. So I've been a karate practitioner since I was a child. I've been a karate teacher now for my entire adult life. And this is just a weekly series where I talk about different topics that are related to karate. If you have any suggestions for next week's video, please leave them in the comment section below. If you have any, just general comments you'd like to add to the topic of this week's video, please leave them in the comment section below. But today I'd like to talk about something that's a pretty controversial topic in the karate world, in the West at least, which is child black belts. Should kids be able to obtain black belts in karate? And I had an experience about 10 years ago that really changed my opinion on this. So I traveled to Arizona to attend a seminar with Mikio Uehara. And Mikio Uehara is a very well-known, very high-profile Shotokan karate practitioner. He was a champion in the 70s and 80s, a champion competitor. That was during the JKA, the Japanese Karate Association, golden age. He was a phenomenal practitioner. Training with him was an absolute pleasure. Being able to see him up close, even at an advanced age, he still is a very impressive athlete. So I'm really fortunate that I was able to attend that event with him. But at the seminar, in the evening, one of the nights, they had a testing, and the seminar attendees were allowed to observe the test, and I did so. And Uehara's own son actually was testing for his black belt at that event, and I was a little bit surprised at the time because he only looked to be about 10 years old. So for anybody that thinks that these child black belts are something that you only find, in the United States because, karate is such a joke and is so commercialized here, that's just could not be farther from the truth. It seems, as far as I can tell, it seems to be pretty normal in Japan as well, that you can have kids that can get black belts. And I think this tells us something about what a black belt is supposed to be in karate. Karate, of course, is a very big martial art. Different styles and different organizations have different standards and it's practiced different ways. So I understand maybe not everybody does it this way, but I think it's fairly standard that, you have karate programs where it takes about 4 years to go from white belt to black belt. In my own organization, that's, the way that the minimum timing grade is standardized. The minimum time requirements, it often will take longer, of course, but the minimum time that it takes to go from white belt to black belt is 4 years. And this is based on the university system, actually. Early on in karate's history being taught in mainland Japan, many of the people practicing it were practicing it in the university clubs in Japan. So the idea was that a university student would join the karate club as a freshman, and by the time they graduated, they would also test for their black belt. So it's like a bachelor's degree. You've been training for about 4 years. Doesn't make you an expert, doesn't make you a super high-level practitioner. It's just it's the first, major rank that you obtain. The first dan, first black belt. And it's a misconception that I think comes a little bit from Hollywood in the West, honestly. This idea that a black belt is a big deal or is a particularly high rank or means that you're an expert. I think that has a lot to do with, early on with karate being taught in the West, you didn't have a lot of black belts. There weren't a lot of people who had been training for a very long time. So there kind of was this perception that if you were a black belt, it was kind of a big deal. The reality is that having a black belt really is not a very big deal at all. Testing up to first dan, that first black belt rank, is not a very high level rank. It doesn't mean that you're an expert. It doesn't mean that you're a phenomenal practitioner. In my opinion, and as a teacher, it means that you have a good grasp of the fundamentals, good grasp of the basics. You can perform, the basics of the art in a satisfactory way. I think that's a good way to describe it. Now, in terms of whether or not kids can or should do this, I think it definitely is true that you have kids that can do that. Maybe not a really young child. I mean, there are plenty of very talented kids out there, so there probably are some very young kids that can do that. But I'd say that it would be pretty rare for a kid under 10, in my opinion, to, be able to be a good representation of the art in that way, that they have a good grasp of the fundamentals and a good ability to perform the fundamentals. I do think it would be pretty rare for a kid younger than 10, but at about 10 years old, I think it's certainly true of a lot of kids that, they can do that they can perform the basics of the art pretty well. So I think the black belt is an appropriate rank for them. I think the problem that we really run into here is just the public perception about what a black belt should be, has persisted to this day, that it's often represented as something that it's not. I am, of course, talking about karate specifically here. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has become very popular in the West in the last couple of decades, and they have a very different ranking system. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it is true that to get a black belt, that's a much more advanced and difficult to obtain rank. My impression is that it's generally considered that it takes, minimum of 10 years to go from white belt to black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And, I'm not as familiar with the history of that art, so I'm not sure exactly, when those standards were set and, how that came to be, but that's just the way it's done in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Kind of confuses things a little bit for the general population when you're trying to consider, what a black belt is or what a black belt should be. But it's just worth noting that, looking historically here with karate, just was never, black belt really was not meant to be a high rank or something that means that you're an expert or you're phenomenal, super high level practitioner. Really should just mean you have a basic level of competence. So that's my opinion on it. I do think that it's okay. And I even have some of my own students who are kids I've never had a student younger than 10 that promoted to black belt, but I have had 2 that I can think of that were about 10 years old that promoted to black belt. And that's pretty true in my organization in general. I can't think of any kids younger than that in my group and in my community that have tested to black belt. But I think that about 10 years old is pretty normal and pretty appropriate. Obviously it's normally going to be a kid that starts very young. They start maybe when they're 5 years old, 4 years old. They're dedicated, good students, maybe have a fair amount of natural talent as well. I think these are the kinds of kids that would obtain black belts at that age. Definitely more normal that students would be a bit older. I'd say that most students won't test it. Even if they start as kids, they probably won't test for a black belt until they're a bit older, more like 12 years old, 13 years old. I was 14 when I tested for my black belt. But yeah, I think that's the big takeaway here. It's not that kids shouldn't be black belts, it's that we should adjust our perception of what a black belt actually is. Doesn't mean that you're an expert, doesn't mean that you're, super high level, phenomenal practitioner. I think those ranks, there are higher black belt ranks that are for that. And in my style, in Tang Soo Do, you even have at 4th Dan, at the 4th degree black belt, you have what's called Kodanja, which is like an advanced level black belt. We have that distinguishing characteristic that, for the more advanced ranks, you should be a much higher level practitioner. I do think we should reserve those higher ranks for practitioners that are exceptional and that are representations of, like the full potential of the art and, the highest levels of the art. I don't think that the higher black belt ranks should kind of be for everyone. I do think that for most people in martial arts, just a black belt, just a 1st Dan, a 1st degree, should be a very, obtainable rank if you're a dedicated student for an extended period of time. I think that once you get past that, if you want to go for higher level ranks, then, we should have much stricter standards as to what's considered, an acceptable level for those higher ranks. But those are my thoughts on it. Please comment below if you have something to say about this subject. If you have a suggestion for next week's video, also please comment below. I would appreciate it. So once again, my name is Daniel Marino. This is Karate Thoughts. Thank you very much for listening. I'll look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks.